everyone, welcome back to my channel. Again, this is Allison with Allie B Creative Studio. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notified when I post some new videos. And if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Again, welcome back. This is the second video in the tutorial series for my pattern, Simply Squares. It's a quilt pattern. It's very beginner friendly. If you missed the first video, make sure you go back and watch it. I talk about, what sort of sewing supplies you need, what different types of fabric you can use. If you need to purchase the pattern, the link is in the description box below, right at my Etsy store. It's a PDF download, so super easy to give you, the yardage and all the measurements and all the blocks that you'll need. So in the first video, I talked about the fabric that I'm going to use. I'm going to use a layer cake. It's called Shimmer and Shine by Canvas Studio. So today I want to talk about, cutting. So again, you've picked your fabric line out, and the quilt is primarily made out of two different square sizes. You have a 9.5 inch square and then a 5 inch square. Now you got to remember that these are unfinished block sizes. So that's important. When you learn to quilt, you learn that you always sew with a 1/4 inch seam along the edge, or your seam line is a 1/4 inch. So when I piece two pieces together, I'm going to sew down with a 1/4 inch seam. So your block sizes are always going to be, or your unfinished block sizes, are always going to be 1/2 inch larger than the finished size. So if you are shooting for a 9 inch block, you have to remember that your unfinished block is going to be 9.5. That's important because as you sew and the more seams that you have, the more that block is going to become smaller. So again, this quilt is made out of two different size blocks, a 9.5 by 9.5 inch square, and then a 5 by 5 inch square, So 9.5 inch square by 5 inch square. And the reason for that is because you have a 4 patch. So when you think about a 4 patch, you have, your 4 squares, but you have 2 extra seam lines. You just don't have that outside seam line. So you have to account for that extra 1/2 inch to be taken in. So it's very important to just remember that that unfinished size usually has an extra 1/2 inch. So what we're going to do, I think I had said in the last video that I was going to make a throw or a wall hanging size. I'm actually going to make a throw simply because it'll show off all the fabric that I really want to use. So in this video, we're going to just cut some squares. Simple, easy peasy cutting of squares. We're going to start with the 9 inch or 9.5 inch squares, and then we're going to do the 5 inch squares. So when you cut a 9.5 inch square, and if say you're using a layer cake, these are 10 inch squares. So I'm only going to take a 1/2 inch off of two sides. You got to make sure that they form this like V. So you're not taking off, opposite sides. You want to take off connecting sides. And then to make, a 5 inch square, you're just going to cut it in half down the center and then a half, horizontally, so vertically. So that gives you your 4 patches. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to kind of sort my squares into piles, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to just do 2 squares at a time. I find it, sometimes you get a little bit over 2, things get a little wonky. So just also a tidbit of information. When you have pinked edges, so let's see, you should be able to see that there's pinked edges. Sometimes things aren't cut 100% square. So a lot of times places will say, so from the downward point of the pink, so the one that's facing in, to the other one should be 10 inches for a layer cake. Now, since these are 9.5 inch squares, that doesn't really matter. But you just have to remember, if you are leaving the pinked edges and you're including them in your seam allowance, you just have to remember that you need to line the outside of the pinked edges up together. So again, I'm left-handed, so I'm going to use my Creative Grids 12.5 by 12 inch, 12.5 by 12.5 inch ruler. It's amazing. I love it. And what I'm going to do is I need to make these 9.5 by 9.5. So when I measure, how I do it is I'm going to find, so here's a 9-inch line and my 9-inch line. So these are my 9-inch squares. And then I'm going to bring it down to the half mark. So I want to line this point up with the bottom point of my square right here. Now, if I'm right-handed, I would be lining it up with this corner because a right-handed person is going to cut this way. A left-handed person is going to cut this way. This is also a great opportunity if you have a rotating mat. If you don't feel comfortable sort of shifting your body and cutting across at the top, this is a great opportunity to get that mat out. But I'm just gonna use my larger cutting surface, and again, I'm gonna line up there's my 9-inch line, my 9.5 inch, line that up with my corner. Make sure that, so I'm gonna include that pinked edge in my seam allowance. So I wanna make sure that I'm lining it up with the outside edge. And then again with the bottom, again using my Quilter Select rotary cutter. If you have a rotary cutter and you haven't changed the blade recently, I recommend that you always change the blade when you start a new project. It just really helps. And I usually arch my hand. If I put it down like this, I feel like yes, I'm pushing pressure down, but it just doesn't seem to work the best for me. Watch those fingers. You don't want to cut your fingers because it hurts. And you just go up, pull that away, and over, pull that away. And try to have a trash can nearby so you can throw things away as you go. So you got 2 blocks done. So I'll do another set. Again, I'm gonna do 2 blocks at a time just because that's what I'm comfortable with. I'm gonna line up all my points. Let's see. Okay, everything is lined up. Putting that 9.5 inch mark again down for me as a left-hander at the bottom right. If you're a right-hander, you're gonna put it at the bottom left. Now, a lot of people would use their mat to measure. So let's just take this for instance. So they would line up this edge, you know, count to 9.5, slice it there, count to 9.5, slice it there. That's perfectly acceptable. You just want to be consistent with what you're using to cut with. So if you switch from your mat to a ruler, a lot of times there's going to be some variations. I find that I like to measure with my ruler. I find it a lot more accurate. But, you know, again, there's no quilt police. If you are just, you know, using a normal household ruler because that's what you have and you don't have a fancy ruler lying around, then go for it. You know, again, no quilt police. Do what works for you. Again, we're going to slice it up on the left and over on the top. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get these blocks finished. And so I have all of my 9.5 inch squares cut. Some things to note. Not all squares in a 10-inch square pack or layer cake measure 10 inches. You might have some fabric that's not cut precisely. So if you get pieces like that, you just need to be cognizant and you might have to trim a 3rd or 4th side. Since these squares are less than 10 inches, if you just give yourself a straight edge on 1 or 2 sides, so just, you know, cutting off just a 1/16, that will then give you that square to square it up to 9.5 inches. Some safety things. I am really, really bad at closing my rotary cutter between cuts. That is bad because when you lose your rotary cutter, when you're cutting extreme amounts of yardage and you try to like flop your yardage out, that rotary cutter may land on your toe, or your leg or your foot or something. And depending on what time of year it is, I am usually, you know, sewing in slippers or in flip-flops, or sometimes in my bare feet if I happen to be sewing upstairs. Close your rotary cutter. It's bad enough to, you know, chop your fingers off with it. It's another thing to slice your leg open with it, especially if you have a brand new blade. They are extremely sharp. So just be cognizant of that. Again, I am a huge fan of the Creative Grids, especially the new left-handed rulers that they've put out. If you are a left-handed quilter and cannot, don't want to splurge yet on getting, you know, left-handed ruler, that's okay. I find if you work backwards, it's really weird, but it's really helpful. So if you turn things upside down and measure from right to left, that will work just as well. So for instance, this is, you know, a left-handed ruler, but your number 1 would be here and your number 12 would be over here. So if you turn it upside down, your 9.5 would be around here. So then you would, you know, cut like that. So a little backwards, but it'll work. Creative Grids just started coming out with the left-handed rulers maybe 4-6 months ago. And this is April 2022. So maybe right around the Halloween or Christmas holiday of 21. And they only have 4 out right now. So don't feel obligated to, you know, splurge. Creative Grid rulers are not cheap. They are pretty pricey. I find that they are worth it though. But you know, your Walmart ruler, a ruler from Joann Fabrics, Michaels, etc., that's, you know, $5, that works just as well. Just gotta twist your brain a little bit. But you know, as fellow left-hander, we're used to twisting our brain a little bit. So I've got all my, again, my 9.5 inch squares cut. So I'm gonna put these to the side and I'm gonna go ahead and get my 5 inch squares cut. Again, you know, 5 plus 5 equals 10. So some people would be like, well, why aren't you just leaving these as 10 inch squares? But when you have 2 5.5 inch squares, you're gonna have that center seam. And that's gonna take in 1/4 inch on each of those squares. So that's gonna give you 4 3/4 inch for 2 blocks, which is 8 and, hold on, let me think. Hold on. It's going to give you more than 9.5, but when you take in that outside seam, that's going to take in that last 1/4 inch and give you that 9.5 inch block to make this. So you've got to remember that as you're sewing seams, you're taking fabric out, and therefore you've got to make your larger blocks that are, you know, 1 piece smaller to fit that finished block size. So let's go ahead, get started cutting the 5 inch blocks. There are more than them for the pattern, but again, go ahead to my Etsy page, purchase this pattern, and it'll lay out, you know, the exact number of blocks that you will need for those 4 inch blocks. Okay, so I'm ready to start cutting the 5 inch blocks. A couple key things. Your 9.5 inch blocks that you've already cut, put them aside, put them far away. You don't want to accidentally cut them. If you are making either one, you will have some extra pieces in the layer cake. But if you're using yardage, and you know, you're picking from a stash, you just want to make sure that you're not cutting it. So I'm actually going to go get my rotating mat because I need to cut this way and this way. So having it swing is really helpful. So give me one. So I'm back with my rotating mat. Again, I do not use the measurements on my mats because I just find that the ruler measurements are much more accurate. So this is when, if you had a shorter ruler, that would come in handy. So I'm actually going to grab my a 6.5 inch by 12.5 inch left-handed, again, Creative Grids ruler. And this just makes it a little less wieldy. So what I first want to do, and what I usually try to do, is I measure. I measure from the pinked edge to the pinked edge. So this has an extra 16 or eighth of an inch on it. So if I measure from inside the pinked edge to inside the pinked edge, that is where that 10-inch line is. So some people will go through and cut off all the pinked edges. So I just make sure when I'm measuring that I'm lining this 5-inch line up with that inside pinked edge. Again, when it comes down in that divot, again, holding down nice and firm, slicing up, I'll pick it up, I'll rotate my mat and do the same thing on this side. Again, measuring from that inside pinked line and cut. And that will give you, ooh, I got a little stray thread. That'll give you your 4 5-inch squares from your 1 10-inch block. So you're going to repeat that until you have the number of 5-inch squares required. Now, I'm also a little weird. If you are cutting, say, 2 different fabrics, I try to separate my fabrics. So that way, when you are going to lay out your quilt, you're not sitting here shuffling through things. Again, I'm a little strange. I like to make my scrappy quilts very methodical. I don't like fabrics touching same fabrics if I can help it. So that just is, you know, another tip that I like to give. So I'll go ahead and get the rest of my 5-inch square blocks, and then we'll be done. Well, congratulations everyone, you have made it through your cutting. You should have your 9.5-inch squares all done and your 5-inch squares all done. And I don't know if you happen to see in the video, but I did mess up when I was cutting. I just measured off the wrong line. I was such in a rush to get these cuts made so I could start putting this quilt together. I just got ahead of myself. So definitely measure twice, cut once. But if you happen to mess up, you know, the pattern has extra fabric built into it, whether it's yardage or fat quarters. So you definitely can make some replacement pieces. It's not a problem. Or if you don't have enough, you're digging through your stash, just find some extra pieces. This is truly, you know, to be that free form, fun quilt that's just made with love. So again, this is the second video. The third video will be layout, which is starting to be the fun part. So if you haven't already, make sure that you give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, and make sure that you go to my Etsy shop and grab that pattern so you know exactly what's needed to make the simple squares quilt. And I look forward to seeing everyone back here soon. Thanks.